Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. The half mile of mayhem. That's Martinsville Speedway for you. A track that's famous for its hot dogs, the most storied trophy that you get, a grandfather clock, and a track that has been somewhat good and sometimes bad, but mostly good to one of the most successful teams in NASCAR as they were able to punch another victory at this track this weekend with a driver that I never thought would have ever won here, and also the return of the sport's most popular driver. Let's get into all the one down at Martinsville. Number 1, Kyle Larson, victorious at Martinsville. Never thought I would put that in a sentence. Kyle Larson victorious at Martinsville. Never thought I'd say that. Larson came up clutch at the end yesterday, winning yesterday's NOCO 400 at Martinsville, holding off Joey Logano, Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, and Chase Briscoe for the victory. Again, Kyle Larson winning at Martinsville, we would have never said that based on how his career has been at this racetrack. It's been a struggle for this guy ever since he came here driving a cup car for Chip Ganassi Racing. Had decent speed in the early parts of runs, but then would fade late and not get the best result. And that's been the way for him ever since he came to the Cup Series. Matter of fact, he actually missed the spring race in 2015 because he fainted during a autograph session, and suffering from dehydration, he was not able to compete. He had to forego his ride for Regan Smith that day. It's not really been a good track to him in his early years of NASCAR. But the last couple of years driving for Rick Hendrick and Hendrick Motorsports, he's found a groove here, and he's finally getting the hang of running up front in this place, leading laps, competing for wins at times. He's come close a few times. The spring race in 2021, his first year with Team Hendrick, he was doing very, very well. And then last fall, he ended up finishing second to Christopher Bell. And this weekend, he was able to put it together at the end. Now, early in the race, he was a good race car. Not a winning car by any means, but a solid race car that could run within the top 10 and sometimes in the top 5 and compete with the guys that had the track position in the race. Well, at the very end of the race, when a caution came out with 58 laps to go, when J.J. Elliott hit the wall in turn 3, it basically sent a frenzy of decisions down pit road for the crew chiefs. Do we want track position, which is what we're going to talk about a lot later, tires, or, what set of tires are we going to put on, 2 or 4? Well, Larson's team, with his crew chief Cliff Daniels back in the fold, because all the Hendrick crew chiefs actually back from their suspensions from the louvers penalty a few weeks ago at Phoenix, they decided to put on 2 tires, and Larson came ripping through the field after he went green and got by Joey Logano, the leader of the race, with under 35 laps to go, drove away and didn't look back. The one thing Larson was praying for that entire time, no caution, no caution, no caution. They never got it. He just kept pulling away. For one thing, because the 22 car was on older tires than the 5 car was, but he just drove some very good laps at the end of that race and was able to finally get a win at Martinsville and get a grandfather clock. Larson's second win of the season. After showing speed the first 2 races but not really having the results, the last few weeks have been better to him. Despite coming up short at Vegas and Phoenix where he had speed, he ran okay at Atlanta but didn't get the finish. He ran well at Coda, didn't get the finish. He finally broke through with a win at Richmond a few weeks ago and had a car capable of winning last weekend at the Bristol Dirt if it wasn't for, deciding to go for old tires instead of maybe those fresh ones to try to make charges up to the field, and unfortunately had run-ins with the 41 of Ryan Preece. This weekend, no mistakes whatsoever, and the 5 teams were able to put it together and get to victory lane. And he was very emotional in his post-race interview because he has actually admitted before that every time he was driving up to Martinsville the first 2 times in the Cup Series, he felt depressed. But the last few years, driving the simulator for Team Hendrick and in a Hendrick car has kind of made him enjoy Martinsville now. And this win makes him love this track right now. I've got a feeling Larson is going to start winning more here at this track now that he finally got that first win at the Paperclip racetrack. And it was a special moment for him to celebrate with his kids in Victory Lane, having his crew chief back. They didn't win together when he went to Victory Lane at Richmond. It was a good moment for Kyle Larson and the 5 team. And it's also a special track, of course, for Rick Hendrick. It's good in most ways. I mean, the bad, obviously, losing his son and 9 other people in that horrific plane crash back in the fall of 2004 is still something that, he has to, deal with every time we go back to that track. But most of the times, I mean, they are the winningest team at this track. 28 wins for the organization at this track. That was their 20th win yesterday, and their 295th win in the Cup Series as an organization. They're just 5 away from 300. You guaranteed they will reach it this year. And this is the track where they also got their first win as a Cup team, their first ever win as a team, when Jeff Bodine won with car number 5. Obviously, Rick Hendrick's run that number for many years, and that number hadn't been to victory lane since the first one with Bodine in 1984 when they were called All-Star Racing at the time. And yesterday, Larson was able to bring the 5 car back to victory lane in Martinsville. A very special weekend and a very, very, very solid day for Kyle Larson and his 5 team. Number 2, the return of the most popular driver. That's right, he's back! Chase Elliott returned to the 9 car this weekend after sitting out the past 6 weeks, recovering from a leg injury that he sustained while snowboarding out in Colorado the weekend leading up to racing at Las Vegas. Elliott, of course, if you remember early in the year, suffered a tibia injury at snowboarding out in Colorado and unfortunately had to be out of the car for Las Vegas and for the foreseeable future. So Hendrick Motorsports called up Josh Berry from the Junior Motorsports team to fill in for Chase until he could come back. And Josh, over the races that he ran, had some very solid runs. The 10th place at Phoenix, the runner-up finish at Richmond, which was a nice gamble, by the way, by the interim crew chief to get them keep them out there, run a few more laps under green, then they got a caution, they were able to hold track position and actually compete for the win at the very end. It was a great call by that 9 team and the interim crew chief. And he's had some good runs, but sometimes not the finishes, but he's done a great job while filling in for Chase Elliott, as Jordan Taylor ran a COTA as well, and he did a good job. Not the finish he'd hoped for, but he did a relatively good job. But this weekend, we were finally able to welcome back the sport's most popular driver when on Wednesday he announced on social media he'd be back at Martinsville behind the wheel. And every Elliott fan, I'm sure, was jumping up and down for joy getting to see the sport's most popular driver. And it's good for the sport when he's racing because it helps with the ratings. It helps put out some entertainment on the track. You know, we want to see, you have your big names, Larson, Harvick, Truex, Logano, Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, and so on battling out there. But you also want to see a guy who's, you know, a former champion of our sport and is son of one of the most popular figures in the sport and has won popular driver award for many, many years and has won Daytona 500s and won a championship in Bill Elliott. We wanted Chase back in the car and he was able to return this weekend. Very strong in practice on Saturday. Qualifying did not really go so well for them, unfortunately. Qualified 24th, which he said, that was my mistake. It had nothing to do with the leg, which, by the way, he said it felt a little bit stiff even when driving, but afterwards, when it was all said and done, climbing out of the car after a couple laps, he felt fine. And when they dropped the green flag during the race yesterday, they could hardly go anywhere. They really couldn't do much back there. They were just stuck around the top 25 for the majority of the race. The highest they got to at one point at some segment of the race was 18th. Then they got lapped under green flag pit stops, but then a caution came out and ultimately shook up the field, and we're going to get that as a situation in a little bit. But he was able to take the wave around, get his lap back, and then they got another caution when they were just about ready to get lapped. And they were pretty much hovering around the top 20. But when that final pit stop happened, everybody came down pit road. Most teams took 2 tires. They took 4 tires. They reached on 22nd. And I don't know what it did, but that 9 car came flying through the field like he had 100 extra horsepower under it. That thing would, from 22nd all the way to a 10th place finish at the very end. He was one of the fastest cars on the track aside from another driver that got a top 5 finish by pitting for 4 tires. But a 10th place finish in your return from a leg injury, not a bad job. He was very exhausted afterwards, you know, climbing out of the car because he hadn't been in a race car for the past 6 races, for crying out loud. But he seemed to feel very happy to be back at the track, being with the people, his crew members, his teammates, his other fellow competitors, and the fans in general. It just felt so good to have Chase back this weekend. And by the way, he's only a few points away from 30th spot in point standings. Now, the top 30 rule does not exist this year because NASCAR decided to eliminate that and say anybody that wins a race and maybe 31st in points can be championship eligible. NASCAR did give him the playoff waiver to be championship eligible should he win a race. He's going to have to win a race, honestly, because he's not going to be able to master enough points to get to 16th in the standings unless if he wins a crap ton of races. But again, win and you're in. That's the goal for the 9 team. And the way the Hendrick cars have been this year, I got a feeling relatively soon we're going to see him in victory lane and a few more times before we get ready to go to Daytona to decide who makes it and who doesn't. So great to have Chase back in the car. It's good to, you know, help the TV ratings and the sport in general. And it was good to see him get a 10th place finish out of the day yesterday. Number 3, rebounds for a couple of former champions and former winners in Martinsville. I'm talking about Joey Logano and Martin Truex Jr. They finished 2nd and 3rd place. I never thought I would say that after what I saw from them early in the race. Now, Joey Logano qualified in the top 10, but they had to drop to the rear of the field due to an unapproved adjustment. I think there was like a water leak or something in one of the components of the race car, so they had to start at the rear of the field, and they really couldn't go anywhere. It was really tough to pass. Martin Truex Jr. hung around the top 5 for the most part. I'm like, that's Truex. He runs well here. I can expect him to try to be a competitor for the win. Then all of a sudden, he started sliding back, and he came on the radio and said, the back end's sliding around like I'm skating on ice in a bad way. And at one point, he fell a lap down, like Logano did. And actually, Logano lost his lap at the end of stage 1, but got it back by being the first car a lap down, but still was stuck in the top 25. Truex just kept sliding back, but also had a speeding penalty at the middle of stage 2 when it came to pit stops, and he just couldn't go anywhere. He was stuck back there and was as low as 30th a lap down, and I felt like these two drivers, I expected them to be contending for the wins, and they're not even going to be close to solid results today. But that'll change under green flag pit stops during the final stage. When everybody was pitting, Anthony Alfredo in the 78 car lost the right rear wheel after supposedly pitting, I guess, and unfortunately lost the wheel, and that's a 2-race suspension for the crew members that changed that right rear wheel, the tire carrier and the tire changer. That unfortunately brought the caution, but it benefited Logano and Truex because they hadn't pitted yet. They were hoping that the race would go green for as long as possible, and if they caught a caution, they'd be able to stay in the lead lap and be in cycle with everybody else, and that's exactly what happened to them. And at the very end of the race, Logano on the last caution decided, we're going to stay out, we're going to roll the dice because track position seemed to matter in this race. And he held the lead for quite a good amount of laps, but ultimately got passed in the end by Larson, but still a second place result for a guy who had to start the rear and couldn't go anywhere. That's very impressive. And Martin Truex Jr. was one of the cars that took 4 tires, and I think he restarted in the top 15, but he fought his way forward for a 3rd place finish. His first top 5 of the season. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I mean, he's had good runs this year, but hasn't really had the luck to go along with it. But both these guys are able to overcome adversity early on the race and benefit from a caution during green flag pit stops to get themselves back in the game and come home with solid results. So great job by both the 22 and the 19 team. Number 4, Stewart-Haas Racing. Strong all weekend, but disappoints on Sunday, despite being fast. Stewart-Haas Racing, the entire weekend, all 4 of their cars, Kevin Harvick, Eric Almirola, Chase Briscoe, and Ryan Preece, all very good in practice, and all 4 of them qualified in the top 10. Ryan Preece got his first career Cup pole, and at a track where he's a short track guy, grew up racing short tracks and modifieds, you're thinking, oh, this is his opportunity for a win, all right. He's so good at these short tracks, and he was the best car by far early on in the race. He led the first 135 laps of the race. Nobody could touch him. That's how good his car was, as well as the clean air that he had. He won stage 1 and seemed like he was going to be untouchable stage 2. However, when a caution came out for a spin from Harrison Burton, everybody had to come down pit road and change tires. While that happened, Preece won the race up pit road, but NASCAR caught him for speeding, and he had to start tailing Charlie at the rear with other guys like Martin Truex Jr., the eventual 3rd place finisher, and Bubba Wallace, who was able to recover, by the way, for a 9th place result. Preece, like the other 2, couldn't go anywhere. He was just stuck back there in that traffic. Now, granted, he was faster than a lot of those guys back there he was racing with, so he was able to pass a few guys, but never got back to the top 10 and never was a factor for the rest of the race. They got back to a 15th place finish, which is not bad, but based on how they started the day, that's a big disappointment for him. Chase Briscoe late in the race seemed to be on his way to winning, leading the race with the track position, with a good handling race car, and a guy that stayed in the top 5 all day and is racing with a broken finger. By the way, he got surgery today and he feels good. But he was going to be on his way to winning until the caution came out late for J.J. Yeley. He decided to take 4 tires and unfortunately could never catch up to that 5 car on those 2 tires. But he was able to bounce back for a 5th place finish. But what could have been for Chase Briscoe? Then Eric Almirola, a guy who has struggled so much this season with so much bad luck, so much adversity, never being able to overcome, and he hadn't had a good run since the top 10 that they had in Phoenix. Well, this weekend, they were finally able to put it together and put together the best average running position of any driver all day long. I don't think he ever left the top 10. That 10 car was so good. And Almirola, ever since joining Stewart-Haas, has been very good at this racetrack. A top 5, top 10 car every time we come here. I felt like he could have had a chance yesterday. He was one of the cars that stayed out on the last caution, like Logano, that decided to not take tires and just hold track position. It worked, but he didn't get a good restart on the initial, on the final restart. He didn't get a good restart, and he slipped back to a 6th place finish. But that's still a very good result for a guy who has struggled lately, and maybe they can get things going down the road. And then we come to Kevin Harvick, the veteran of this team, who was, once again, like his teammates, very strong all day. He slipped back to his lowest 11th at one point and then fought his way back up and actually led some laps. I'm like, here we go. And unbelievably, actually, he won stage 2, and Kevin Harvick hadn't won stage since 2020. Unbelievable. I did not realize that. And it seemed like they maybe could have had the chance to run down Briscoe at the very end of that race because Harvick's car was so good on long runs. But on that final pit stop, they had a problem too. When they left the pits, they had a flat right front tire, and they had to start at the back of the pack because of that. And unfortunately, they had to put on their qualifying right front scuff tire. So he was never able to recover and only got a 20th place finish out of it. Very disappointing for Stewart-Haas Racing. They came in with high hopes for this weekend after what they had in practice and qualifying. They were all good yesterday, but unfortunately, the results just don't show it. Unless if you're Chase Briscoe and Almirola, they're good results, but you're thinking you could have done better had you not had those cautions or those late race mistakes for the team. Very unfortunate, but for what was a promising weekend for the organization. At number 5, the racing product at Martinsville. Well, we came in with this new short track package hoping to provide better action for the drivers and for the fans. More side-by-side battles, more side-by-side passes, especially with a lot of tire fall off. We really didn't get a whole lot of that yesterday, in all honesty. Now, was it better than last year's spring race? Yes, there were comers and goers here and there, and there was some exciting battles, and there was a lot of passing at the very end of the race when the track came to some guys. But for the most part yesterday, it was very difficult to pass. Denny Hamlin, who finished 4th, I mean, he at one point had the best car on long runs and looked like he was going to win the race, but when he got stuck back in traffic after those green flag pit stops and the caution came out, he restarted in the top 10 and just couldn't go anywhere. Said the car was plowing, and I can't blame him. I mean, you never would kind of expect that from a guy like Hamlin who could pass people like crazy unless his car was that good. But unfortunately, he came out of the car yesterday post-race and said, they can't pass with this car. It's incredibly impossible. And he makes a valid point. I'm sorry, but I mean, we saw great action a few weeks ago at Richmond, good side-by-side battles, and we saw some passing out there. It took us some challenges, but there was some passing. But in this race yesterday, there was hardly any at the beginning. At the very end of the race, when guys had the cars that were able to go anywhere they pleased on that final run, they could make some passes. There was some action at the very end of that race. But unfortunately, for the majority of the first half, it was basically follow the leader and hold your track position. I mean, I never thought I would have said that at Martinsville, especially nowadays when they're shifting at this racetrack. It makes it a little bit difficult too, especially because you can brake very well here, and that's the thing that we tried to change with this car for the short tracks. Tried to make braking a little bit difficult for the guys, and we wanted some more tire fall off for one thing. We didn't really get a whole lot of that. Now we don't want any too much tire fall off that'll probably cause a right front tire or left front tire to go down. But unfortunately, we want side-by-side action, and we frankly didn't get a whole lot of that yesterday until the very end. And it was hard to pass yesterday. When you got up to a guy's bumper, you just stopped there, and you couldn't really do much after that. And that's why, as I mentioned, had Priest not had the speeding penalty, he would have been on his way to winning because that's how much he had regarding the car out front and clean air and track position mattered. If he didn't have the penalty, we wouldn't have been talking about Ryan Priest in the back of the pack. We would have been talking about him probably winning or getting a top 5. We wouldn't have been talking about Eric Almirola or Chase Briscoe coming up short. We would have probably been talking about maybe Denny Hamlin winning had he not been stuck in traffic. But unfortunately, that's what we've got right now at Martinsville. It's got to change when we come back here in the fall. We've got to make it a little more exciting. I mean, listen, last year's finish of the race and the final 20 laps, that was some good racing at the very end. But we got to do better. We got to get more tire fall off. I mean, somebody even proposed maybe add a little more horsepower. We're running 670 horsepower, the highest speeds for these cars, except if you're on Daytona or Talladega or Atlanta. We might need to try to up the horsepower just a little bit. Like go back to 750 when we had the short track package for the Gen 6 cars in its last 2 years in 2020 and 2021. We had some great action at Martinsville, but we got to do something about this. I mean, the final 50 laps, they were entertaining. The majority of the first part of the race, we got some work to do when we come back here in the fall. That's That's where I stand. That's my own thought about what I saw from yesterday. But other than that, it was still a good day. We were able to get the whole race in. There was a chance early in the week that weather might have played a factor, but thankfully it didn't. We were able to get the whole thing in. His sun came out at the very end of the race, and it was just so good to see Kyle Larson finally emerge victorious at this track and have the sport's most popular driver back in the car and come away with a solid run. So next weekend, we are off pack racing at Talladega. Hold on to those seatbelts, folks, and get your grills and get your drinks and get your popcorn ready because that race is going to be one hell of a day and a race. Talladega is so exciting. It's so entertaining. It's good for the fans, for the drivers. They're literally bumper to bumper, side by side, all day long at 190 plus miles per hour. You can guarantee the big one's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When will it happen, and who will emerge victorious and survive next weekend? Will it be the driver to win there in the fall, the sport's most popular driver, Chase Elliott? Will it be Kyle Larson finally getting a break on super speedways and getting to victory lane? Or will it be Ross Chastain who put off a thrilling pass at the very end of last year's race off a turn 4 to win at Dega? We shall see. Well, it's the party track, and you better believe there's going to be a lot of excitement, a lot of white knuckle racing next weekend. So, hope you all have a wonderful week. Subscribe, like. Once again, congratulations to Kyle Larson and the 5 team on that very impressive, very solid win yesterday. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Let's go racing!